Imagine a world where the only way to remember anything is to store it in your mind. No smartphones, no books, no notes, just your brain. This might sound like a distant fantasy, but it was the reality for people before the invention of the printed book. In those times, memory was the most powerful tool anyone could have. It wasn't just a skill, it was a necessity for daily life, for learning, for entertainment, and for everything in between. Today, we often take our ability to write things down for granted, but in the past, memory was the art preservative of all arts. In ancient times, memory ruled over every aspect of life. It was the primary way knowledge was passed down from one generation to the next. Imagine a world where the only way to learn a craft or a profession was to memorize everything you were taught. For centuries, personal memory was the key to education, commerce, and even entertainment. The ability to remember was so important that it was considered an awesome faculty, and everyone had to cultivate it in ways we can barely imagine today. The ancient Greeks understood the power of memory so well that they gave it a mythic form. They created a goddess named Mnemosyne, the Titan daughter of Uranus, heaven, and Gaia, earth, and made her the mother of the 9 muses. These muses represented various forms of art and knowledge, including epic poetry, history, music, and astronomy. When the daughters of King Pyrrhus challenged the muses in song, they were punished by being turned into magpies, which could only repeat the same monotonous sounds. This story shows how important memory was in Greek culture. It was not just a skill, but a divine gift. Everyone needed the arts of memory, and these arts could be cultivated. The skills of memory were something to be perfected, and those who excelled at it were admired. However, in recent times, memory training has become a laughing matter, often associated with charlatans. But the traditional arts of memory have a rich history, as detailed by historian Francis A. Yates. The origins of mnemonic techniques can be traced back to the Greek lyric poet Simonides of Chios, who lived around 500 and 5468 B.C. According to legend, Simonides was at a banquet where he was hired to sing a poem in honor of his host, Scopas. However, only half of the poem praised Scopas, while the other half was dedicated to the divine twins Castor and Pollux. Scopas, angry at this, refused to pay the full amount. Shortly after, Simonides was called outside by 2 young men, but when he went out, he found no one there. Moments later, the roof of the banquet hall collapsed, killing everyone inside. When the relatives of the deceased came to identify the bodies, they found the corpses too mangled to recognize. Simonides, however, was able to identify each body by recalling where each guest had been seated. This experience led him to develop the classic form of the art of memory. Cicero, a prominent Roman orator, explained Simonides' method. He suggested that to train memory, one must select places and form mental images of the things they wish to remember. These images are then stored in the selected places in a specific order. This way, the order of the places preserves the order of the things, and the images denote the things themselves. Think of it as using your mind as a wax writing tablet, with the places and images serving as the letters written on it. This method, based on the concepts of places, loci, and images imagines, became a cornerstone of memory techniques in Europe. It dominated thinking in the Middle Ages, and was used by rhetors, philosophers, and scientists. A treatise by a Roman teacher of rhetoric known as Ad Hirnium became the standard text on the subject. Quintilian, another great Roman authority on rhetoric, described how to use an architectural technique to imprint memory with a series of places. He advised imagining a large building and walking through its rooms, remembering all the ornaments and furnishings. Then, each idea to be remembered is given an image, and as you walk through the building again, you deposit each image in a specific place in your imagination. This system still works today. In the Middle Ages, a technical jargon developed around the distinction between natural memory, which we are born with and use without training, and artificial memory, which can be developed. There were different techniques for memorizing things or words, and various views on the best environments for memory exercises. Some teachers advised finding a quiet place to avoid distractions, while others believed that a well-traveled person was better equipped to provide varied memory places. One of the most famous examples of a remarkable memory is the elder Seneca, a renowned teacher of rhetoric. He could recite long passages of speeches he had heard only once many years ago. He would impress his students by asking each member of a class of 200 to recite a line of poetry, and then repeating all the lines in reverse order. St. Augustine, who began his life as a teacher of rhetoric, admired a friend who could recite the entire text of Virgil's works backward. Before the printed book, memory was essential for entertainers, poets, singers, physicians, lawyers, and priests. The first great epics in Europe, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, were preserved and performed by oral tradition. Homer's word for poet is singer, and the singer before Homer often chanted a single poem short enough to be performed in one sitting. The achievement of a figure like Homer was to combine hour-long songs into a connected epic with a grander purpose, a larger theme, and a more complex structure. Laws were also preserved by memory before they were written down. The collective memory of the community was the first legal archive. The English common law, for example, was based on immemorial customs that had been passed down through generations. The first manuscript books in the ancient Mediterranean were written on papyrus sheets, glued together and rolled up. It was inconvenient to unroll these books, and frequent unrolling wore away the written words. As a result, people relied more on their memory. Rituals and liturgies were also preserved by memory, with priests serving as the custodians of this knowledge. Religious services, often repeated, helped imprint prayers and rites on the youth of the congregation. The use of verse and music as mnemonic devices highlights the importance of memory in pre-printed times. For centuries, the standard work on Latin grammar was the Doctrinale, a 12th century text in 2,000 lines of doggerel. Versified rules were easier to remember, although their crudity later appalled scholars like Aldus Manutius. Medieval scholastic philosophers transformed memory from a practical skill into a virtue, an aspect of the virtue of prudence. St. Thomas Aquinas, a prominent philosopher, memorized everything his teachers told him in school. His biographers claim that he could remember anything he had ever read or seen. In his Summa Theologiae, Aquinas explained Cicero's definition of memory as a part of prudence, one of the 4 cardinal virtues. He provided 4 rules for perfecting memory, which became the basis for many textbooks and paintings. Dante's Divine Comedy, with its vivid depiction of hell, purgatory, and paradise, made use of the concepts of places and images to create an easily remembered order. There were also humbler examples, such as English friars who described pictures of vices and virtues to help people remember them. Petrarch, a renowned scholar, also had a reputation for his expertise in artificial memory. He offered rules for choosing the places where remembered images were stored, emphasizing the importance of medium-sized loci. By the time the printing press appeared, the arts of memory had been elaborated into numerous systems. Peter of Ravenna, in his popular handbook Phoenix, Sive Artificiosa Memoria, advised that the best memory loci were in a deserted church. He claimed to have fixed 100,000 memory loci in his mind, and added thousands more during his travels. The effectiveness of his system was demonstrated by his ability to repeat the entire canon law, 200 speeches of Cicero, and 20,000 points of law verbatim. The printing press changed everything. Before the printed book, manuscript books were used by the small literate class as aids or substitutes for memory. However, the printed book was more portable, accurate, and convenient to refer to. It allowed people to access information without storing it in their minds. The printed book became a new warehouse of memory, superior to the internal and visible warehouse in each person. When the codex of bound manuscript pages replaced the long manuscript roll, it became easier to refer to written sources. The addition of tables, running heads, and indexes in manuscript books showed that memory was already beginning to lose its role. But the printed book, with its title pages, numbered pages, and indexes, made retrieval even easier. The consequences of the printed book were predicted by Socrates, who lamented the effects of writing on memory and the soul of the learner. In his dialogue with Phaedrus, as reported by Plato, Socrates recounted how the Egyptian god Thoth, who invented writing, was reproached by the god Thamus, the king of Egypt. Thamus warned that writing would create forgetfulness in learners, because they would rely on external written characters rather than their own memory. Writing, he said, would give the appearance of wisdom without the reality. The perils of writing would be multiplied 1,000-fold with the advent of print. Victor Hugo beautifully captured this change in his novel Notre Dame de Paris, where a scholar holding his first printed book turns away from his manuscripts and says, "This will kill that." The printed book not only replaced the manuscript, but also destroyed the invisible cathedrals of memory. It made it less necessary to shape ideas into vivid images and store them in memory places. The same era that saw the decline of memory in everyday life also witnessed the rise of Neoplatonism, a new realm of the hidden, secret, and occult. This revival of Platonic ideas in the Renaissance gave memory a new life and a new purpose. Plato had emphasized the soul and its memory of ideal forms. Neoplatonists like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola developed an occult art of memory, turning it into a mystical practice. The memory theater of Giulio Camillo, exhibited in Venice and Paris, provided memory places not just for convenience, but as a way of representing the eternal nature of all things. In conclusion, before the printed book, memory was the most powerful tool in human life. It was essential for learning, entertainment, and the preservation of knowledge. The arts of memory were cultivated and perfected, and those who excelled were highly admired. The invention of the printing press changed all that. It made information more accessible and less dependent on individual memory. While memory remains an important faculty, the printed book has taken over many of its functions. The transition from memory to print is a fascinating chapter in human history, one that reshaped the way we think, learn, and preserve knowledge.